my name is John, and in this episode I'll be talking about and reviewing NBA Jam, the arcade game. I remember when this game came out in the arcades back in the early 90s, I was blown away by the graphics. The gameplay was unique. It started a huge trend of other sports arcade games like NFL Blitz and other franchises. Midway did a fantastic job with NBA Jam. So without any further ado, let's take a closer look at the game and check out some gameplay. NBA Jam was released in the arcades in 1993 by Midway. The main designer and programmer for the game, his name was Mark Trammell. It was also one of the first games to use licensed NBA players, and the rosters that they used in the arcade version was from the 1992-1993 roster. One thing I noticed is the roster is different than the home ports, depending on when the game was released. The arcade's been ported to a number of different consoles and even the PC and handhelds by Acclaim. And depending on when the game was released, for example, the Genesis and Super Nintendo rosters were from the 1993-1994 roster. The Sega CD is even different because it's from a different year. For example, Benjamin on the Sonics wasn't on the home port. Instead, it was Detlef Shrimp. The gameplay for NBA Jam is very similar to an earlier Midway arcade game released in 1989 called Arch Rivals. Arch Rivals was also a 2-on-2 basketball game. There was no fouls. You can push and shove. It's been ported to the NES, the Genesis, a couple other platforms. It's a really fun game, but I prefer NBA Jam overall. I mean, I really like the graphics. What they did, it was written in assembly language, and they digitized the players' images on the actual characters that you're playing, which is really cool. So playing 4 players on NBA Jam was a lot of fun. And this is a huge hit in the arcades because the arcade owners, they made a lot of money on this game. You had to put quarters in every quarter, and oftentimes it was 50 cents for each quarter. So oftentimes you're paying up to $2 a game per player, so actually the arcade owner could make up to $8 for a really quick game. So that was a huge incentive for the arcade owners to own NBA Jam. In addition to the graphics, which I really like, I also like the sound. You get the kind of pop funky sound to the game, which really fits it. And the announcer is actually Tim Kitzrow, but it sounds like Marv Albert. And I think that's kind of where Midway was going with this, because Marv Albert was a huge announcer back in the early 90s. And it really fit the game very well. NBA Jam was a huge success in the arcades for Midway, and because of this, it spawned off a whole bunch of other great sports titles, including NFL Blitz, which was an action kind of NFL version of NBA Jam, so to speak, Wayne Gretzky 3D Hockey, WWF, WrestleMania. There were a lot of sports titles that came out after NBA Jam. I don't think it would have come out if NBA Jam wasn't as successful as it was. One of my favorite things to do in NBA Jam is to get on fire. And to do this, you have to make 3 consecutive shots by the same player. It sounds easy enough, but when you're playing the computer, it's actually pretty challenging. And once you make 3 shots in a row, you're on fire. And then what being on fire allows you to do, it gives you unlimited turbo. You don't have to worry about turbo going down. It also increases your shot percentages. Although I've noticed every once in a while when you shoot, even if you're on fire, you miss the ball as well. Yeah, and yet another thing I really like about NBA Jam were all the hidden Easter eggs. There's a point in the game when you're logging in, it'll ask you for your 3 initials and your birth date and month. And if you put in a certain sequence, a password, so to speak, you can unlock hidden players. Here's Carlton. This is a game designer. So in the arcade version, you can unlock the guys who designed NBA Jam, where in the home ports, you can play as Bill Clinton, Will Smith, and every home port console had a different hidden character. Like, for example, the Atari Jaguar home port of Tournament Edition, you can play as like the VP of Atari at the time. One fun fact that not many people may realize was that Mark Trammell, the developer and programmer for NBA Jam, he was a huge Pistons fan at the time. And he put a kind of a bug in the game where if you're the Bulls and you're playing the Pistons and it's down to last wire and you're the Bulls and you're taking the last shot for the win, it's always going to miss no matter what. It's kind of a bug, but it's kind of funny you put that kind of it's a biased bug there because he's such a huge Pistons fan. Now, one thing that's kind of disappointing to me was 2 key players that were missing from the roster in NBA Jam, both the arcade version and the home console versions. Those are Michael Jordan and Shaquille O'Neal. Michael Jordan basically owned the rights to his name and wasn't really associated with the players associated apparently, and they couldn't get the rights to Michael Jordan's name and likeness. And Shaquille O'Neal also basically signed an agreement to do other games, like I guess like Shaq Fu. He'd rather do Shaq Fu than be an NBA Jam. That beats me. So unfortunately, NBA Jam doesn't have any of those players. Now, somewhere along the line, I'm not sure how this happened, but Acclaim, who ported NBA Jam to the home consoles and PC, they basically took over the right. They owned the rights to NBA Jam, so they would release NBA Jam Extreme, which is basically NBA Jam, like a 3D version of 3D rendered graphics. It ended up being a flop, and unfortunately, Acclaim kind of took the NBA Jam name and franchise and kind of beat it into the ground, unfortunately. Midway would continue releasing basketball games very similar in gameplay, and they would, for example, they'd come out with NBA Hang Time. They also had a game called NBA Showtime, NBA on NBC, which is pretty successful and a lot of fun. That was also in the arcade, ported to the N64, PlayStation 1, other home consoles. Great game, great series. But to me, NBA Jam, the original NBA Jam, really is a classic. It started it all. It's one of my favorite arcade games of all time. Still a lot of fun to play today. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm actually playing this on MAME, arcade emulator. I got this machine at a place called PhoenixArcades.com. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you soon. Take care.